Tonight we'll be joined by Mr. Paul Smith, a retired U.S. Army major. He served 7 years in the government's remote viewing psychic espionage program at Fort Meade, Maryland. He is one of only a handful of government personnel to be personally trained in coordinate remote viewing, CRV for short, by Ingo Swann. He was the primary author of the government's remote viewing program, CRV Training Manual, and served as theory instructor for new CRV trainee personnel. Mr. Smith is also the author of the book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, Inside Stargate, America's Psychic Espionage Program. You can learn more about Mr. Paul Smith and purchase his book at his website, rviewer.com. That is rviewer.com, rviewer.com. Tonight's show will be broken down into two segments. The first segment will be an hour interview with Paul Smith, followed by up to a second full hour of open lines. The call-in number to tonight's show is 760-542-3929. Again, that's 760-542-3929. Good evening, Paul. You are on the air. Good evening.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. I'm glad you made it on short notice. It was short notice, and what an interesting topic. So I'm very appreciative, and so are our members at the forum who are tuning in right now and participating on our mini chat at shtf411.com. So I've heard you on Coast to Coast before. I've seen the show with you talking to Freeman Fly, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a brief overview of what remote viewing is?
Yes, remote viewing it's really a skill. It's something that can be taught and transferred, that capitalizes on the underlying, I guess you could say, intuitive or psychic capability that everybody just innately has by virtue of being human. It helps an individual sort of learn how to recognize, ultimately the training helps an individual learn to recognize between the mental noises going on in his or her mind at any given moment and the really subtle signal that's coming in through the intuitive sources or through ESP. I noticed someone in one of the chat comments said, well, it sounds like ESP to me, and it really is. Remote viewing is just a means of accessing the ESP capability that each of us has. And it allows the viewer, someone who applies remote viewing, we call a viewer. It allows the viewer to perceive a location, an event, a person that is distant from him or her, either like on the other side of the planet or inside a sealed room or maybe an image inside a sealed envelope, or even distant in time into the past, and with certain limitations into the future.
Now, is it a honing of people say, oh, I've got a sixth sense and I felt it coming or I knew something was coming. Is it a honing of that ability or is it something different?
Well, it's an application of that ability, I guess would be the best to say, and there might be some honing that gets involved as well. Most people who pay any attention at all to their experiences probably have, at one time or another, had one of those sort of sixth sense sort of experiences. They've just known who's on the other end of the phone when a phone call comes in, or they've had some alert or some dream or something when someone that was close to them had a problem or was under stress or been injured, something like that. Or who knows, any myriad of other kinds of things. Even sort of deja vu effects. Sometimes people will realize that they have had that experience before. They really haven't had an experience, they encounter, but it all falls into place, and they say, oh, man, I had that. It was a dream or something. I know that has happened to me before, that maybe I had some kind of precognitive awareness of it. Now, some straight deja vu effects just are deja vu, but some of them actually are awareness of some future event that you will experience. And the irony is that people think of these as being some huge momentous event, but quite frequently have these little precursors of the future of relatively plain old mundane kind of things. That happens a lot to people.
Now, you mentioned, you've been saying remote viewing is used for people. Can it be used for objects and inanimate
Well, actually,
items?
objects and locations and events are the more frequent targets that are used, and people are too. But in the military, when we applied it in the military, we were actually more concerned with describing locations, objects, and events. So, for example, we might want to know what's inside a building in the Soviet Union that we can't get any other more conventional spy access to. Task the remote viewer to describe the inside of the building, and then on those times when they were successful, a remote viewer would actually succeed in describing what was inside the building in terms of apparatus, activities, those kinds of things.
Now, is there a set ritual and possibly like maybe a remote viewing etiquette as far as preparation or the actual setting that it's being conducted in? Like, do you have a... Go ahead.
Yeah, there are actually a number of methods and approaches to remote viewing, and some of the listeners may have heard of these. The one that I teach and promote is called controlled remote viewing. There's another methodology called extended remote viewing. There are sort of derivatives of controlled remote viewing taught by various people, such as technical remote viewing, scientific remote viewing. Those are all spin-offs of the main controlled remote viewing. And then there's others. I like to call them generic remote viewing. These are ones that people just kind of developed on their own and do it different ways. And anticipate probably the next question. The differences here are this. In control remote viewing, the viewer is sitting at a table or desk or whatever with a stack of paper and a pen. A reference number, we call them coordinates, is given to the viewer. The viewer puts that down, writes, and is in a relatively a normal state of consciousness, although a mild altered state just sort of get induced over time as you're working on the session. Extended remote viewing is a bit different. In extended remote viewing, the viewer is actually laying down in a quiet, dimly lit room and attempts to get to the point right between being awake and asleep. We call it a hypnagogic state. The viewer tries to establish that with the idea that then the data can come in more easily when the brain is less active, at least in terms of our analytical everyday kind of behavior. And so you can see those are kind of different modes or methods of doing remote viewing, but the goal is the same, to allow a human to perceive through non-sensory means. Even though it involves some kind of perceptual process, it does not involve the direct senses to perceive information or experience location outside of where they, in theory, ought to be able to do it according to standard physical science.
Is this a right brain, left brain scenario? You mentioned having to get in a quasi, almost, I want to say, trance state. Is it a right brain issue? I've heard a lot of talk about.
In ERV, you are kind of in, I guess you might say, a trance state, although maybe just more relaxed state with your mind awake, body asleep, kind of a condition. Obviously anything we do involves left brain, right brain. Our brains, unless you've had your corpus callosum severed, both hemispheres are going to be working together or at odds, as the case may be. It appears that it is the right brain that actually receives the input and processes the input in that sense. And of course, the left brain gets involved in when you're attempting to describe what you're seeing, verbalize, write down. But, of course, the left brain also causes trouble because that seems to be the source of most of the mental noise, because it's the left brain's job to interpret any information that comes in through the system, through the nervous system. And when this information, the ESP information, if you will, the information you get through a remote viewing process, when it starts to come in, the left brain feels like it needs to explain what it is, give an interpretation of it. And those interpretations oftentimes are very wrong. They're completely mistaken. We call that analytical overlay, because the left brain is analyzing the information and trying to assign labels and names and such to it. And that's where a lot of the problem with being psychic comes from. If you don't understand that your left brain is going to be trying to get into the mix and do all this analyzing, you oftentimes will come out with completely wrong stuff. And then people make fun of you, saying, "Oh, you're not psychic, you're just making all that up," right?
Now, I'm trying to understand this. In your mind, are you are there pictures that are coming through, or are you almost like, is it automatic writing, or I'm trying to envision the.
It sounds to me like what you need is to me to kind of describe what remote viewing is like, what the experience is like. That would probably answer that question best. And remote viewing is, first of all, the term remote viewing is really a kind of a misnomer. A researcher and psychic and artist and all kinds of things, a guy named Ingo Swann, kind of a man who wears many hats. He's the one that developed the remote viewing protocol originally, and he named it remote viewing because his experience was he got a lot of visuals, right? But remote viewing actually is more than just a visual experience. It involves all of the senses, the perceptual senses. So you can smell things that are targeted, you can taste them, you can touch them, you get the tactiles off of it, you get temperatures and all that kind of thing. You get all of that stuff comes in. Now, it just so happens that humans process the world largely visually, and so you do kind of focus on that, and so hence remote viewing sort of fits, but isn't quite accurate. I really wish that he had named it remote perception. That would be a much better term, and the folks at Princeton who are researching some of this ESP stuff for a long time at the Pear Lab, they did call it remote perception. So that's really a better term because it involves all aspects of perception. Okay, that's a side step there for a second. But what is it actually like to do remote viewing? And you can think this way: your mind is gaining information, and a lot of it is sensory oriented. Even though your senses aren't involved, you're still getting these smells and tastes and colors and shapes and all this kind of thing. So that's coming in. And your brain is slowly trying to put those together and give you a coherent picture of it. But what comes in is actually, you do ultimately kind of get images, but you have to be careful with the images because oftentimes those are left brain constructs. It'll take the information that's coming in, and then it will process it and say, well, what is this anyway? And then it'll offer you a solution that's maybe mistaken. So a good example might be, let's say the target is the Eiffel Tower. Okay, so now here's a piece of information you need to know to understand what I'm about to say. In remote viewing, the viewer should be blind to the target. What that means is the remote viewer should have no idea what the target is up front when they're doing a session. There are a number of reasons for this, which maybe I'll go into later, but for now, the remote viewer has to be blind to the target. So he or she has no idea that the target is the Eiffel Tower, no conscious idea that the target is the Eiffel Tower. And the viewer is given a tasking number, let's say 8675309, just for an example. Okay, so 8675309 means describe the Eiffel Tower to the person who wants the viewer to do this. But the viewer is only given the number 8675309, and then their subconscious has to go out and find out what that mission is, what the tasking is, which is describe the Eiffel Tower. So then the viewer's subconscious finds the Eiffel Tower and starts feeding that information in. But it comes in at first in bits and pieces. You only get little flashes of things, colors, maybe shapes, textures, and then you might get kind of relationships between shapes. So you might get this impression of crisscrossing steel beams of some kind. Okay, and that's your first real glimpse of what the Eiffel Tower might be in your head, but obviously that's only part of it. Well, what happens then is your left brain gets the idea there's crisscrossing steel beams, and the left brain says, oh, I know what that is. That's the bridge we crossed last summer when we were on vacation, okay? Because there are similarities between a steel girder bridge and the Eiffel Tower, right? Mm-hmm. So the trick is to, of course, learn not to do that. But you can see what the actual truth content was. It was crisscrossing beams, black, cool, shiny, maybe wet if it's raining there, who knows, right, and things like that. And the left brain jumped on that and interpreted it in a certain way. But as you go through the session, and of course this assumes you know what you're doing, as you go through the session, the information gets more robust. You start getting more details, and you reach a point where you can actually sketch the shape of whatever the target is or important shapes there. You start getting more information like maybe tourism, maybe foreign. You might even get the idea it's in France. Those kind of things start coming in, and you start to build a better picture. And when I say picture, I'm speaking figuratively here. You start to build a better, construct a better idea, if you will, of what the target is. Now, you may never actually get to the point where you're able to say for sure that this is the Eiffel Tower, What you might be able to say instead is something like this: it's a tall, metallic structure with crisscrossing, lattice-like construction. It's in a foreign country. People come to visit and take pictures. It's monumental in size, very impressive, and I really like it. Okay. Now, notice you never once said it's the Eiffel Tower, but the description is absolutely correct. So
wow.
that's sort of how it develops in general. Ultimately, you do get the point where in some settings and some sessions, when you're really on, you actually do get really kind of full-blown images of the target, because by then you have so much information that you're able to have those, right? And well, I could tell you a bunch of stories about those kind of things, but the key to it is that the information when it first comes in is very kind of vague. I often refer to it as it's like having a half-remembered memory. All of us have had that experience where we've had a memory from the past, and it's so long ago that it's really vague and kind of fuzzy, but it's a memory we recognize as having had. This is a half-remembered memory that you have never experienced before. It comes from somewhere else. And so that's kind of the quality of the experience in a remote viewing kind of event.
Now, let's say the target of a remote viewer is a person. Have you ever experienced, like, talking to, I'm just going to call them targets, have they ever mentioned that they felt they were being watched, they felt possibly someone was trying to look through their eyes, or anything similar to that? And is there any way to block, if someone is remote viewing you, is there any way to block that?
Okay, so those are two questions. They're actually kind of independent of each other.
Exactly.
So let me take the first one and then come back to the second one. The first one is, have any of the people I've remote viewed seemed to indicate that they were aware they were being remote viewed? And for me, the answer is no. Okay, none of the people that I've had discovered at targets or been targeted on have ever seemed to recognize that they're being viewed. There are a few stories told by my colleagues that indicate that occasionally they encounter people who are aware of them. Now, a lot of there's only a very few of them, and one of them, in fact, the one that I'm thinking of right now, Joe McMoneagle. I don't know if you've ever heard of Joe.
No.
He is Joe McMoneagle is arguably probably the best public remote viewer to come out of that program. He's better than me, and he's better than anybody else I know that's in public right now, except maybe Ingo Swan, although Ingo is retired from the scene. He doesn't really remote view anymore. But anyway, Joe McMoneagle talks about a case where he was targeted on a location in the Soviet Union, and he was there remote viewing, and he swears that while he was there, another remote viewer showed up. But it was a Chinese female, and she knew he was there, according to him, right?
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting story, and it might be true. Of course, the problem is that it's possible his left brain constructed that. I don't know. I didn't have the experience, so I can't say that he's wrong. I can't say he's right either. But I'll tell you, if he was right, that's pretty cool. Pretty interesting.
Wow. Well, that's the reason I was asking, because in what I've explored on this, and I've looked into the psychic genre for a long time, and I've often wondered about that exact thing. So, is there a way to block a target? Like, can they block a target? Let's
yeah, that's an interesting question, and the answer right at the moment seems to be no. There were some experiments done at Stanford Research Institute under contract to the military to try test that very idea, whether you could block a target or block a viewer from accessing a target. And the indications seemed to be that you couldn't, no matter what they did. Now, there was some discussion that maybe the best way to do it is just to, like, for example, if you have a laboratory and you're doing some secret stuff and you don't want the viewers to find out about it, then you hang, like, Mickey Mouse cartoons and all kinds of weird stuff and funhouse mirrors and all this stuff around. So when the viewer comes in, they think they've just screwed up and gone somewhere else, and it confuses them, and so they don't bring back the data. But
wow.
Yeah, I don't know. That seems like a lot of work, and whether or not it actually worked, who knows? It's a tough thing to test, but.
And with it being multi-sensory, I could only imagine what they're using for smell around there.
Yeah, really. You import a few skunks,
Yeah. All right, I want to move on to some of our forum members. We have a thread going. I don't know if you saw those questions, but they wrote their questions in there, and I want to move on to.
Now, these are the ones that are on the front page, right? Or
yes.
the page. Yes, yeah. I've skimmed. I've read a couple in detail, and I've skimmed several of them.
Okay.
I had an event before this, so I wasn't able to read it in detail. But go ahead.
Okay. I'll clarify. I've read them several times, so I kind of have a feeling what they're asking for. But Live and Learn wanted to know what the accuracy rate is. And
that's funny because that's what I'm looking at right now. That's an interesting question too, because there's not been good measurement opportunities. It's hard to measure an accuracy rate for remote viewing because, of course, it's kind of subjective. Say, okay, so the viewer is remote viewed, let's say, I don't know, a Soviet space vehicle. Okay, well, they've sketched it correctly. They've described a number of things about it, and they've had a very accurate session. But how do you count that? How do you quantify that? Well, you get 5 points for the sketch and 10 points for the question and the answer, whatever. I don't know. Do you take a ratio of how much right you got compared to how much that could have been gotten? Well, see, that doesn't work either. So I have this sort of seat of the pants kind of an answer for this, and it goes like this. In general, of any given remote viewing session, we're talking now here a trained, experienced remote viewer, between 70 and 80% of the time, the remote viewer will provide evidence that he or she actually did access the target and produce information that he or she could not have gotten in any other way than through ESP. Okay, roughly 70 to 80% of the time, which means, of course, that 20 to 30% of the time, they don't get anything that's accurate. Remote viewing isn't a 100% skill. But since it shouldn't work at all, even having it work some of the time is really kind of miraculous when you get right down to it. But so 70 to 80% of the time, they produce evidence that they actually did remote view. Now, that may not be very good, high-quality evidence, but at least it's some evidence. And then I take that and say roughly about 40 to 50% of that, they do a high-quality remote viewing session where they provide really good information about the target, or sketches, whatever. They describe the target very well. And so that boils down to roughly, 30, 35% of the time maybe you get really good high-quality sessions. And then another 35, 40% of the time you get some results, but not a lot, and then roughly 20, 30% you don't get anything. So that's about the best I can give you as far as an accuracy rate. I mean, it's a fair question, but it's a tough one to really come up with a sufficiently quantified kind of a response for.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to expand her second question. I want to expand on this. It's on that accuracy rate. Have you seen, she says, has that changed, and if so, how and why? Has the accuracy rate changed? Have you seen a change in it you've been doing this for 30 years?
Geez, how long have I been doing it? Let's see, since 1983. I did my first session in the fall of 1983. So that's 30. That's 30, or did I? Let me see, 27. Okay,
27.
Yes, that's right. You can see I'm so right-brained. My math skills aren't all that great, but so. Well, my accuracy rate, I would say, increased as I got practice, right, if that was the question. But overall accuracy in the community, as more people learn it, I haven't seen that increase so much. But part of the problem is, of course, you have different people at all different levels who have learned it out there since it's gone into the civilian world. Different levels of experience, different levels of training. Some got training from good instructors, some got training from bad instructors, or mediocre instructors in between. And so you have this really kind of broad spectrum of success. I've seen some sessions, and of course I haven't seen anywhere near, I've only seen a fraction of all the sessions any of these new remote viewers have done, but I've seen some of them that equaled the best that any of the military viewers did. And I've seen some that are just totally awful, right? And everything in between. So, that's about the best I can say to that question, too.
Now, her next question, and some of these questions they're repeated by the different forum members,
Sure.
so I'm kind of combining them. But her next question is, do they have side effects or
Yes.
repercussions after? And
Yes.
I wanted to ask, yes. Well, what I was going to ask you to expand on that is, you keep mentioning right brain. You just talked about being, you now think right with your right brain. So I want to expand on her question. When you are targeting something, does it, after the session, does it expand? Like if you go to sleep that night, will you actually get more information?
Usually not.
Sleep?
Usually not, and the reason is, of course, particularly in the variety of remote viewing I practice, controlled remote viewing, the emphasis on the control. The idea is you take direct control of the process, and so you start it and then you end it, and you're taught to, when you end it, to end it. Because you don't want this stuff leaking into your daily life. It gets distracting, and you really aren't capturing that information anyway. This is one of the reasons why people say, well, why didn't remote viewers predict 9/11? Although there were people who got precognitive kind of reports of these, remote viewers in general didn't do it because a remote viewer is supposed to be, you think of yourself as kind of a tool or a piece of equipment, that when you're turned on, you're doing the job, and when you're turned off, you're not. And that actually helps keep people stable. If you open up this aperture and you're always getting this ESP data in, it could be kind of unsettling, and some folks might even get a little bit out of control, right? So you're taught to start it, turn it on when you're ready to do it, when you have a tasking, and then when you're done, you shut it off. And so with 9/11, nobody tasked the remote viewer to predict it. so most remote viewers didn't get anything out of it. Now, I'm actually going to go back to the repercussion side effect question here in a minute, but I did want to say this. Even though you're taught to turn on and off, it does actually help your intuition. So it's kind of like you have your stereo on, it's got sleep mode, right? Or your TV, let's use TV better. It used to be in the old days with the tube TVs, you turned it off, it was off. You turned it on, it took about 5 minutes to warm up, right? But now they actually have a small trickle of power in there so that you're ready to turn it on, it comes on very quickly. Well, remote viewing tends to actually leave a little bit of energy in your intuition circuit, so that I've found that that once the remote viewer has a fair amount of experience at it, the little intuition circuits will actually light up quicker if there's something they need to know about in their lives or whatever. So I'll sometimes, for example, get little tweaks or something that make me aware that I need to get a hold of somebody, or that something's going to happen, pay attention, those kind of things. And so it's helpful even if it isn't turned on necessarily, just not in the sense that you're going to get more data about your target. That you try and discourage. So, and let me go back to the side effects thing. One side effect that you do get is technically called getting a little dingy. You know, when you really get deeply immersed in a session, when you come out of it, you are in a little bit of an altered state of consciousness, and so you walk out and you might because you're right, your left brain has really been turned on, and your left brain has kind of been shut down to some degree. Your judgment isn't necessarily the best, and in fact, we generally recommend you don't go driving if you've really had a heavy session. There's a funny story. One of our military remote viewers, who some of your folks probably heard of, Mel Riley, he'd been in doing a remote viewing session, and he'd really gotten into it, and when he came out, he walked up and he threw his car keys in the dumpster, and without even realizing it, then walked in the office, the building where our office was, and the guy had been working with him comes up and said, "Mel, what did you do that for?" He says, "What? Why did you throw your keys in the dumpster?" And he says, "Did I throw my keys in the dumpster? What?" And he concluded that it was his subconscious telling him that he was in no condition to drive.
Wow, that's just incredible.
Yeah, so that is really the only side effect that I would say that you get from remote viewing, other than enhanced tuition down the road and those kinds of things. You do hear stories about some people who went crazy because of remote viewing, or somehow something happened to them because of remote viewing, had a heart attack because of remote viewing. There is no credibility to those stories. There's no evidence that remote viewing has caused anybody to go crazy. That wasn't already crazy, I should say. has never caused a normal person to go crazy, has never caused a normal person to do something or be inclined to do something he shouldn't do. Now, there are a couple occasions when someone who already was maybe a bit unstable got involved in remote viewing, and that might have been the catalyst that set them off. But those are folks who had problems to begin with. So it's not something the remote viewing itself caused in them.
Now, you've touched upon, and I've read online that pretty much everyone can do this, but is there an optimal candidate or an optimal trait that you look at for trainees?
Well, of course, currently in the civilian world, if somebody wants to learn it, we take them on board. We don't feel like we have the right or the interest in turning people away unnecessarily. And let me say this about that. Everybody has the capability. They have the underlying faculty, and with the right training and practice, they tend to turn out to be pretty decent at what they're doing at the remote viewing thing. It's kind of like any other human skill where you have a bell curve. There are a few who just don't ever get it. You have a few who turn out to be world class. The vast majority are in the middle of the bell curve, where they can function reasonably well. They can work up to their expectations. They can do what they need to do. They can accomplish projects. They can have successes, right? And so that's kind of how it works. Now, as it stands right now, we really don't know who, if anyone, is a better candidate for remote viewing than someone else. In the military, what they were looking for, because some of the ESP tests they'd had over the years, some of the ESP research showed that maybe people who were extroverted might have a little bit more success. People who were above average in intelligence, competent in other areas and things like that, they might have more success at this. And also people who had some creative pursuit that they were involved in and were fairly good at, such as fine art, painting or drawing, music, playing an instrument, whatever, creative writing and all those kinds of things, any of that kind of creative skill, that if they had that also, that tended to maybe indicate they would be better. And the reasoning there was all those things are kind of right brain resident sorts of behaviors. And since the right brain seems to be the key to all of this, they had already attuned, got the right brain and left brain cooperating better, and they got their right brain, in a sense, amped up and more able to work under where they wanted to direct it. And so I think there's some evidence for that someone with an artistic bent may find it easier to do, but I've seen lots of folks who couldn't draw their way out of a paper bag who have still done perfectly well with remote viewing. It just, in some cases, might take a little more work, a little more practice. But in general, did the military use any drug therapy or recommend a specific diet for the remote viewing? No. Trainees? No. Nope. They should have. I don't know. but no, they didn't get involved in any of that aspect. You just came in and did your training, and drugs were definitely not used. First of all, they probably wouldn't have been allowed. And second of all, the theory we were working under, and I say we, it's really the scientists were working under, was that drugs actually would probably cause more trouble than they would help. If you think about it, a lot of folks have thought, well, LSD, some of those, what do they call those kind of drugs? Hallucinogenics? Yeah, hallucinogens, those kind of things, might enhance LSD, psychedelics, that's the word I was looking for, might enhance ESP kind of performance. But the problem is, it may well be, because a lot of the stuff that people who've been under the influence of LSD have reported sound highly psychic kinds of behavior. But the problem is that not only does it perhaps enhance your psychic behavior, but it also enhances the mental noise as well. All the hallucinations themselves, which aren't target-related, end up getting in the way and smothering the data that you might be otherwise getting. So they figured out pretty early that it probably didn't do much good to to use drugs to enhance the process, all it might do is mess things up. There are rumors that we heard in the military program that the Soviets, our counterparts to the Soviet Union, they tried drugs on them and they ended up burning out some folks because the drugs didn't enhance it. They just made things worse for them. So, I don't know. I haven't seen hard copy evidence on that, but we had heard that was the case. There are some things that seem to help a little bit. Caffeine, for example, seems to help. Of course, that's a cognitive enhancer anyway, so that would seem to make sense. As far as I know, nobody's tried, any of the speed or any of that kind of stuff. Maybe that would help. I don't know, but I'm not about to try it. One thing that doesn't help is alcohol, because that's, of course, a central nervous system depressant. And so, at least in our experience, alcohol and remote viewing don't really go well together. So, anyway.
I mean, I know these are kind of off-the-wall questions, but they seem very pertinent.
Sure. No.
Definitely.
Yep.
So I've got a question from Spectra 000, and he wants to know. He wants to know if you can remote view the past.
And the answer to that is absolutely. You can remote view the past just as well as you can remote view the present. I don't know why that is. The metaphysics of it are really kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. How could you remote view the past if the past doesn't exist anymore? And yet you can. So I don't know, does the past still exist? I guess we don't know. But nonetheless, if you think about it, there is actually no such thing as the present anyway. There's either the future, the past, or the very recent past. The present to us is really recent past because we have this kind of window of consciousness. I'm going to estimate roughly a tenth of a second. So every time you perceive something, it actually happened a tenth of a second before you recognize that it happened. And so when we remote view, really, when you get right down to it, almost everything we remote view is the past. Just some of it's farther back than others. So,
can we remote view the future? You touched upon 9/11. Can we remote view the future for terror or natural disaster?
I have to give a qualified yes to that. All the evidence suggests that the future is much harder to do and do accurately than the past. And the way I've worked this out, whether or not, this is my answer to it. I can't say that it is the definitive answer because we don't have a definitive answer, but my answer to it is that the future doesn't yet exist. Now, that almost sounds like an oxymoron, but in fact, there are a number of philosophies that suggest, in those philosophies, that maybe the future really is already there and we're just moving along the timeline. The way all of this behaves suggests to me that it really is the case that the future doesn't yet exist, and there are all these possible futures that stretch out from our current timeline, right? And so every so often you might get lucky and perceive a possible future that ultimately will become real. But oftentimes else you get the wrong possible future that isn't going to happen, and so you end up with just meaningless data or wrong data. Okay, and that's really kind of how it turns out. Now, every once in a while you get an event that lies across a bunch of timelines. So, for example, the earthquake and tsunami that happened, 2005? In Indonesia, whenever that was.
2004, I thought, but roughly, yeah.
Sometime back then. That was maybe an event that had some deterministic elements to it. In fact, it probably was. And so, presumably, if you were looking forward and trying to predict a major event, the odds of getting that one right would be much higher than they would be when the next terrorist attack will be or something like that. That also doesn't involve human intentionality. An earthquake is something that happens as a consequence of the natural unfolding of events, whereas a terrorist attack involves human intentionality. And you can have, for example, a terrorist who absolutely intends to commit an act at a certain time, but then something happens and he changes his mind and he doesn't do it. If you pick up on the intent, you might predict the event going to happen, but then because he can change his mind, maybe it doesn't happen, and then you're wrong, right? The earthquake, on the other hand, is the culmination of a number of deterministic events that started way back in the past and continue up to the future. your chances of picking that up are much higher. Okay, so
can
I don't know.
remote viewers work together, and how would that occur?
Well, we did work as teams in the military program, and I have had viewers work in teams since then in some of the operational projects that I've worked. There are a number of ways to do it, and there are a number of possible pitfalls and such. One of the problems is that sometimes, and you never know when these times are going to be, you'll have, let's say you have 3 viewers working a project. If you run them all on the same part of that project, same target involved with the project, it can happen that 2 of them will be completely wrong, and the third one, the minority view, will be correct. And so if you go with the majority view, the 2 that are right, then you're wrong, right? And it turns out later that the standalone guy was the one that got it. That's one problem. Another problem is what we call telepathic overlay, where sometimes one viewer will piggyback on the information of another. They'll somehow telepathically link. It's totally unintended. It happens at the subconscious level, but every once in a while they'll link up and start describing the same thing. Now, it might happen that one viewer is correct, and so when the other viewer piggybacks on that viewer, it gives this telepathic overlay connection, they're reporting accurate data too. But it's the same accurate data that the first viewer reported, so it's not helping you any, right, in that case. But overall, at least the research they did at SRI, they reported in some of the reports they made to the CIA, they reported that overall running multiple viewers on a project seemed to enhance the quality of the information. Even though there are pitfalls and downsides, overall they tended to get better information when they had more viewers working a project.
That's interesting. Now, do police departments contract out with remote viewers?
Excuse me. That's a tough question to answer, because police departments, if they do work with remote viewers or psychics of other stripes, they tend not to want anybody to know they're doing that. They're afraid of being embarrassed by it. I do know of some instances where they have. In fact, I and some of my folks have done some work with police. It's hard to say departments, because it isn't like in the cases I've worked, we weren't exactly approached by the department. We were approached by a single policeman who needed something done. And in a couple of these cases, they had the blessing of their department, but they were sort of acting on their own in a way. And then we would be targeted on the case. We had one where it was a cold case. This was not one we solved. My viewers for some reason, couldn't get on it at all. But he was a police lieutenant, and he'd been assigned some cold cases, and he knew about us, and the department said, okay, go ahead. And so he ran us on a couple of cold cases. Actually, just one cold case in this case. And that was a sort of a quasi-official thing, but not necessarily a formal tasking from the department. So I do know that some police work is being done with RV. How official and formal it is, it's hard to say, because they don't want to go on record with it.
Wow. So it's kind of the skeleton in the closet, so to speak.
It really is. But, and that's unfortunate. I'm reading a book right now, by the way. It's called Extraordinary Knowing by Elizabeth Meyer. She was a very prominent psychiatrist. Unfortunately passed away just as her book was being published. But she talks in there about how hard it is for scientists to admit that they believe in ESP. When she started researching for the book, she started asking folks kind of under the table, said, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And she got all kinds of responses from actually working scientists who were willing privately to admit they were doing it, but they would never admit publicly that they were interested or had these experiences or anything.
Now, I'm scanning. I have them punch in all cap locks on the chat, the important things they want me to, ask them this or tell them this. And Von Hellman is saying that he's had dreams about Air Force One crashing, not from a terror attack, just, mechanical, faulty mechanics. Was that already ruined for remote viewing, since he already knows what the topic is and he's had dreams about it? Or how would since he's putting that out there, can that be remote viewed since it's been put out there?
Well, yeah, see, here's the problem. As mentioned earlier, really to be authentic remote viewing has to be done blind, where the viewer does not have any idea what the target is, and preferably double blind, where nobody associated with the viewer knows where the target is until after it's been done. So in other words, the tasking would be passed through an anonymous means, so the viewer would not have contact with anybody who knew what the target was. Now, the fact that somebody had a dream that Air Force One might be going to crash or something, that actually would already be, in a sense, a remote viewing if it was a veridical dream. In other words, if a dream that really was going to happen, right? Oftentimes people have dreams of things that aren't going to happen because that suggests maybe they've watched that Harrison Ford film Air Force One, right, or something like that, right? I'm not saying that's the situation here, but at that point, you probably wouldn't be able to run a remote viewer on that. And this is a good time to get into this part of the problem. If a viewer is run front-loaded, you run into some problems. The first one is, of course, the skeptics would say they just cheated. Well, if they already know what the target is, then they just describe what they know about the target, and of course they're going to be good, right? Of course they're going to have a good success. And then they just sort of come up with a plausible scenario about what's going to happen, and then there you go, okay? So that's one problem with remote viewing front-loaded, but that's not the big problem. The big problem is that mental noise I was telling you about earlier. When you remote view front-loaded, then what you already know about the target from newspaper reports or hearing somebody talk about it or whatever, reading in a book, or what you could then infer, you could logically guess about the target, all that's going to be right there in your conscious awareness. Excuse me, and it makes it really hard for you to disentangle that from the very subtle signal that's coming and bringing you the real data. And so being front-loaded actually gets in the way of remote viewing. It doesn't help you. And so if you were to say to somebody, okay, so-and-so had this dream that Air Force One was going to crash, would you do a remote viewing session on it and tell us if it really is or not? Well, the viewer's either going to come back and say, yes, it is going to crash, or no, it isn't going to crash, and you can't trust either outcome. You can't trust either report because you don't know how much of that is contaminated by what the viewer already knew about this Air Force One scenario.
Okay, let me move on to. I've got several questions here, and I'm trying to understand how to culminate them because you're answering some of them in combination with others, and so it's interesting. It's an interesting topic.
And we're running short on time. Wow, that went quick.
Yeah, it did. We're going to have you back for sure. Yeah, we'll give you more notice next time.
Okay.
Have you ever looked into the Kennedy assassination?
No. As far as I know, I've never been tasked on it. Of course, remember the rule: you have to be blind. I can't decide to say myself, "Well, I'm going to check out the Kennedy assassination today," right? I have been run on a number of interesting targets in the past blind. So, for example, there's this other famous or infamous remote viewer, depending on how you think about him, Ed Dames. Many of the folks have probably know of his name. But back when we were at the unit together, Ed worked a bunch of us on trying to locate the Ark of the Covenant, right?
Oh, wow.
Now, we didn't know that's what it was because he was working us blind on that, at least some of us. Others, I found out later, he was working front-loaded. But me and some of my other colleagues, we were all worked blind on it. So we had no idea what we were going after. But we provided a lot of interesting information on it. My session alone, I had no idea it was the Ark Covenant, but I described and sketched a Middle Eastern city. I didn't know why I was doing that. I talked about, and it's been a while, so I don't remember very clearly what it was, but I remember saying something about it being inside an underground room, and it was protected by I don't know what all, and described it. And I didn't describe it well enough that I personally recognized it as the Ark. But when you go back and look at the data, you say, oh, yeah, I see. Here, maybe a little piece of it here, and you describe some things that were correct about it there. And since I was blind on it, I felt pretty good that the data I produced was probably correct, which tells me a couple of things. First of all, that the Ark still exists somewhere. The other thing it tells me is it seems to be somewhere in the Middle East in an underground room. Okay, so
wow.
Beyond that, I don't know what to tell you, but that is one of those kind of I call those anomalous projects because ultimately you don't have a bottom line on them. Right now, in principle, if they really did find the Ark, then we compare our data, but I think it's unlikely that we will. So,
mm-hmm. Now, this is coming from Nemesis 2012, and I've seen him a few times in the chat here, scrolling through. Remember my question? So here goes. He was reading. I don't know where the site came from. I think it was Illuminati News to something. I don't know what it was. But he wants to know if you've heard of a place called the Black Hole. I believe it's in Quantico, Virginia.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Actually, no, I haven't heard about it, but the description here makes me think the information's a little bit, the stuff in blue I just skimmed through, but it looks like this is
it's the red
somebody
question.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
You're in the thread right now?
Oh, yeah, I was skimming through this, and it looks like that whoever, I think that he or she, maybe it's a she, right, got this information probably from another website. It looks like that this is somebody who had a little bit of information and then kind of blew it out of proportion or whatever, did some speculating on it. From the original description of this, it sounds to me like, and it's possible a place like this exists, but that it probably is for psyops, for psychological operations, and that's different than parapsychology kinds of things like remote viewing and ESP. Psyops is a very well-known field that's been practiced for a long time, and but all the services have their own psyops training program, and it's done in very classified facilities because in order to work, the enemy can have no knowledge that you're trying to use psyops on them. But it's just a way of using human psychology against them to try and get them to do things that you want them to do or not do things you don't want them to do and that kind of thing. Other than that, I don't have anything to say about this because I've never heard of it called the Black Hole, but I can certainly imagine a military facility called that because it was so classified that that nobody could get in or whatever. So
now let me ask you one last question because we were pretty close to it. The topics we've covered tonight, there's been a few like the Kennedy assassination or Air Force One. Now, actually knowing them right now, you could not remote view. But let's say in 4 days, if you're working with someone else and they listen to this radio program, could they give you numbers 00114 and they're actually asking about that?
Yeah, in principle. I mean, at that point, supposedly, I wouldn't have any idea what the target was consciously. Although it might take a little longer than that, because if I started getting Air Force One or something, I'd say, oh, I'm just remembering that show back then, and it's just leading into my thing, right? You'd probably want to have much more standoff different distance than that, but as far as time, just so that I forgot about it, for example. I hope nobody does that, because I really don't have time. We're going out of town for Thanksgiving. I got a million things to do before then. But at any rate, in principle, you could do that, sure.
Is there any? Are you working on anything big right now, or what do you have in the future?
Well, there's a couple of things I actually can't tell you about right now, not because they're hugely secret, but because they involve intellectual property issues, and I'm just not allowed to talk at the moment. But they'll come out. They'll be public knowledge eventually. I am working on another book, and I'm taking my dissertation and starting to write some papers for publication from that, and all of them have to do with promoting remote viewing and promoting ESP as a human skill that's real. It's notorious that in science nobody, they don't believe that ESP is real, except for the ones who won't admit that they believe it. And my dissertation was focused at persuading people that maybe we don't know as much about the universe as we think, and that we've got it wrong. By the way, if folks are curious about that, they can go to my website at rviewer.com. It's posted on your site, I noted, and they can follow the links down to my dissertation. It's pretty heavy technical philosophy for a good chunk of it, but overall, I think you'll find some intriguing stuff there.
Well,
I probably ought to mention a couple more on my websites. I also note you have the free dowsing DVD there. Posted there, and that is really, I'm not kidding, that's a free DVD. It's the documentary part of my course, and you have to pay some shipping and handling, but it'll give you a really interesting idea about dowsing, which we didn't even get a chance to talk about tonight. That might be an interesting topic on a different night. But yeah, those are probably the two main sites: rviewer.com and freedowsingdvd.com.
Well, I guess we're at the end of the hour and the end of the interview. And yes, if you would come back, we would love to hear about the dowsing. You're right. I was watching your dowsing videos, and that's an interesting topic. I've met a few dowsers either for water. I met one dowser that would do it on a map for either gold or whatever he was looking for on a map. But yeah, so we're at the top of the hour, so I guess we'll go ahead and let you go. Is there anything that you would like to close with?
No, not really. Just visit the websites and order that free DVD.
Absolutely.
And I think I'd be happy to come back. I appreciate the opportunity, and even if it is short notice, again, I'd be willing to do that if I have a free part of my schedule. So.
This was great. It really was. I mean, I want to thank you again. Taking the time out of your schedule on short notice, joining us on this HTL401.com radio. It was fabulous. It was a great hour.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and we'll talk again.
All right, sir. We'll talk again then. Thank you.
You bet. Bye.
Bye. All right, folks. We're in the second hour. That was Mr. Paul Smith, the remote viewer. His website is rviewer.com. That is RVIEWER.com. RemoteViewer.rviewer.com. Caller, you're on the air. Hello? 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 All right,
Hello?
folks, we've got a caller. Hello? You're on the air.
Hello? Yes, is Paul actually here with us?
No, I let him go at the hour. Do you have any?
Oh, okay. So this is just kind of pre-open discussion on remote viewing. Okay. I've been remote viewing for about a year. Actually, Paul kind of mentioned one of the derivatives. I've been doing TRV. Over the last 20 years, I've had the unfortunate experience. I got involved with some people a long time ago, and turned them into the police, and it was the wrong group of people to turn in. Since then, of course, life has been complete hell. The things that Paul was saying, remote viewing cannot be blocked. There is no way. As far as people knowing what you're going to do ahead of time, the thing that he didn't mention is that remote viewers have the capability of seeing the possibilities in a person's future. So where the person can change their minds, you are able to see the possibilities, the roads that they can take. And if you have enough people, you could actually manipulate that person's path, which has happened to me. And it's been very difficult, and I want to try and describe this because this might get a little confusing. I'm extremely intuitive, so I've been able to, kind of pick up on some things. But when another remote viewer or a group of remote viewers actually figure out that you're intuitive, and keep in mind that this is a skill that enables you to find out anything about a person, they can have a field day with you. So where I walk around and I get premonitions about things, I have people wrapping themselves into my life and will actually say certain things to get my mind going. And it totally throws me off course. Whereas if I stay away from everybody, I can get a pretty good indication of certain things that are going to happen. And it gets pretty scary.
How do you do your particular remote viewing? He does CRV, controlled remote viewing, and you said you do TRV. What is the difference there?
Okay, well, first of all, from what I know about control remote viewing is completely blind. With TRV, you do it blind, and they tell you that after about 2 years, you can do it front-loaded. So you're given a set of 8 numbers, okay, like 1, 2, 3, 4, / 5, 2, 7, 8. Those numbers are attached to what is called a queue. And that queue, for instance, could be my name / death. And that would be, I would be actually remote viewing my death. Now, if I do that front-loaded, and you're doing this on paper, so you're following a set of protocols, and you're doing this within 45 minutes, it makes it very, very difficult to try to do that front load simply because imagination creeps in. And that's what Paul was saying. It's very, very difficult to do it when you know what you're looking at. So the main difference is that control remote viewing is completely blind. Ingo never wanted remote viewing to be front loaded ever. So when they say derivative, TRV is a derivative, and one of the main big differences is that you're supposed to be able to do it front loaded. Now, I went through Ed Dames, I went through his course, and I also have gone through SciTech's course, which I have just about completed their course. They're both different. Ed tends to leave some things out, in my opinion, and that's why I went over to SciTech. But both of their ways, they do work. They do bring results. So it's not that they don't work. I also have the CRV manual. In looking at the manual, I would probably say that you'd probably have more accuracy with CRV than you would any of the derivatives.
Now, you said you can't turn it off.
What's that?
You said you cannot turn it off. Can you go into more detail about that?
Okay. Well, for me, as from what I hear you saying, I'm unable. Remote viewing works when you cannot think. When you're doing this process, you cannot think. There's no thinking allowed. So when I walk around in that state, I walk around, and some people may not understand that, but I'm kind of like a freak anyway. So I walk around, and I'm just plain and simply not thinking 90% of the time. And things come to me, and it's like wham. And I get a huge flash of something that's going to happen, and it closes. Which they say that psychics are that way. Okay, I can't sit down with somebody and give them a reading, but I can see certain things in my own life or around certain people. But yeah, it's not something that I can turn off. And what I've also found is after doing sessions, and quite a few of them, I get trickles of information which are different than the flashes, where something will just pop right in, and it's seconds away from happening. Or I will hear somebody talking about something, they're not even present in the room, and the subject matter that they were talking about, which I kind of got a glimpse of, actually happens later on. So it's kind of strange. You can't turn stuff like that off. Once somebody starts remote viewing, they will definitely get trickles of information that just come in, and they may not even identify it right away, but it does happen, and it's. Go ahead.
Do you experience, for lack of better terms, I'm going to give you an analogy. You're on the ocean, and the ocean goes from calm, still waves to massive 30, 40-foot waves of ESP, psychic waves coming in that hit you. That kind of sounds like what you're describing. So do you feel that way?
Yes, but it does not. It is not something that happens. I can't force it. I cannot force it. It's also very frustrating when you're doing remote viewing. You want more data to come in, and it just doesn't come in. But yes, I do feel that way. My mother, unfortunately, and I kind of hate to admit this because this is going to make me sound like I'm just way out there, but it's true. 2 years, my mother was very stable. Everything was good. She had a master's degree. She was solid. 2 years before my mother passed, I had a glimpse of her shooting herself, and of course it did happen. But it's something like that when you get flashes like you can't help but be taken back. So yeah, for me, when something like that comes in, it makes it very hard to move forward with certain things as well, because I can be presented with a situation, look at it, and if I get something, I don't want to continue with it because I know where it's going to end up.
Now, you mentioned a manual, I believe. Did you not?
Yes, the CRV manual.
Where can you get that?
At FireDocs. If you do a search on Google, and search FireDocs, also at Paul's site, at Paul's website, Paul has the CRV manual on his site.
The military manual.
You can, yeah, you can. That is, I believe it is the military manual, but it's also at FireDocs, and I think Paul wrote the foreword on that manual, which is the one I have. And you can get it on the internet. You have to be careful because I would go to FireDocs. I don't trust any of the other sources.
They changed it, or what is your?
I believe that there are some edited versions out there, but
okay.
But for anybody that's listening, this skill is incredibly powerful. It is very, very powerful. The things that you can find out, the things that you can know. I will give you I created what's called a blind pool for myself, which is a bunch of targets that I basically threw into an envelope, and this is more coincidental than anything, but I had thrown in basically my ex-girlfriend's name and / present location, and the night that I pulled it out and ran it, I did the session, and she was exactly where I came up on the session. I figured out by the time I got done with the session that she was at the casino, and I went right to the casino, came right down the escalator, and walked straight to her. So, I mean, you can locate people. The thing that I guess would be really difficult is if my girlfriend had been out in the middle of the desert. There would have been no identifying markers for me to really know where she was in the desert. So you do need something that's identifiable to help locate where that person is.
Now, you had said that when you first came on, you mentioned, I believe, some danger involved. Can this be used against you? Can another remote viewer use information against you?
Well, as you know, remote viewing is an information collection tool. So giving you not only a hypothetical situation, but it's pretty much the situation I'm stuck in. If you have enough people, and you have a few remote viewers that are very good, sure, it could be used against you. If a group of people wanted to use information, and the remote viewers gave those people the information, yeah, they could play havoc with you. They could mess with your head, big time.
Wow. Now, what would you recommend for a new remote viewer to hone their skills?
Wow. Well, you know, what's kind of funny is in some of the tutoring I've gone through and suggestions, and I really don't want to encourage front loading, but it's suggested that we actually queue up a place that we're going to, and actually see if we can view that place that we're going to before we get there, and then of course go. Something that would be very similar to that would be, I would encourage a person to work on not thinking and allowing information to come in. Like Paul said, this is an ability, an innate ability that we are born with, and in order to receive any type of intuitive or psychic information, you cannot block you can't block your unconscious, and any thought will block that. And I found if you get very emotional about something, it will block that. You have to be almost non-feeling, robotic. It's all the skills that you need to do remote viewing effectively. So I would just kind of, and it's kind of confusing because, okay, well, I want to know something, so I'm going to practice not thinking. Well, I can tell you that I've received information that way. It's almost like you ask yourself a question, you let it go, don't think about it, and don't think about anything, and keep your mind clear, and wait for the information to come back. That's the best way I can describe it. So I would say work on honing your intuitive ability. That's one way to do it. But I don't think this skill is for everybody. Anybody, I believe, can do it, but I don't think it's for everybody.
Now, I was asked, I'm looking at our small chat, and someone wanted to know if, since you do front load, have you seen anything on Air Force One potentially crashing due to mechanical failure?
I haven't looked at that. I haven't looked at that, and it would be very difficult to look at that after being told. Just like Paul said, once somebody throws something like that out there, you would either have to have somebody task that, or you could create a blind pool and wait for it to come up. But taking a blind pool and setting targets aside, you still need to wait a certain amount of time. So it's as blind as possible. So you're not remembering any of the numbers or anything like that. The best thing you can do, I think, is to learn CRV and make sure that you're doing everything blind. And I really think with this skill that if you're going to make this something that you're going to do on a long-term basis, you need a team of people. You need somebody that can task the targets, and you need a viewer, and I think you kind of almost need somebody who's a good analyzer that can analyze the information after the session's done. There are people that can do both analysis and remote viewing, and they're very strong in both skills. But I think you need a team of people.
Now, you said when you first called in, you were talking about you're able to tune into people, but you can't get them out of your head. I believe you said that you had actually called the police about this, or without mentioning names, can you elaborate on what you opened up with?
Can I elaborate on what happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or what is happening?
I can do that. That's not a problem. I'm 40 now. When I was 21, I got involved with some people that were moving large quantities of drugs. And at that time, I was using drugs. I've been sober for quite a long time now. But what happened is that whole situation went really, really bad. I ended up freaking out and turning them into the police, and because they were involved in a lot of stuff, and I got really, really spooked out. And I didn't know it at the time that they knew remote viewers. What I did know is that they had mafia connections, and what I did know is I was in over my head. From that point forward, I got messed with left and right. I had, I think it was a few years later, I had somebody walk up to me just kind of out of the blue and say, and the guy's name was Bob, and he just said, hey, Brett, have you ever heard of remote viewing? And I said, actually, no. And he goes, well, you better master it, and you better learn it, and you better get it down. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. So I blew him off, and then I was in radio for roughly 10 years. I was a radio DJ. And I got home one night, and I was pretty much tired of listening to FM radio, couldn't sleep, flipped on Art Bell by accident, and Ed Dames came on, and I listened to Ed, and I listened to the whole thing about remote viewing, and it continued on, and I kind of put it all together a little bit late, but it all started to make sense, and I just kind of kept my fingers crossed that it was all bullshit, that, there's no way that this could actually be going on. Well, when people started to come up to me and tell me certain things that were going to transpire in my life, they started to come up and tell me things that, these are people that didn't know me. People coming up and telling me things out of my past that I hadn't told anybody. I started to get a little uncomfortable. I started to feel like, what's that?
This is after you started remote viewing that people started.
No, this is before. This is before I started viewing. In other words, the attack is starting to happen. So I kind of sat back, and I got the impression from everything. I was saying, okay, all I need to do is stay away from people and just sit back, and everybody will come to me. And the people that started to come to me and wind themselves into my life, they made me uncomfortable at first. They didn't say anything right away, but then once they got pretty comfortable, then they started in real heavy with saying certain things, and of course I started to go, well, how do I deal with this? And so what I did was I ended up saying, okay, these people that come in, I'm going to try and work on my intuition and figure out when I know that this particular person is involved with any of the people that I've gotten wrapped up with, or this is just my imagination. Because I still couldn't buy into the fact that I had no privacy, that I had zero privacy, basically
now,
zero privacy. Now,
were these people coming around because of the drug issue that you discovered, or I mean, what were these people doing?
Well, one of these people along the way told me I'd be forced into suicide. Now, you know, you have somebody telling you that, and it's like, force you? I don't think so. But I watched it happen to my mother. I mean, my mother came back and started telling me the same stuff that I was going through, and I didn't know what to say to her. I did not know what to say to her. And it was over and done, of course, after she shot herself. And to this day, I'm having to live with relatives. There was $100,000 left after the funeral. Of course, the money. I went through the money. I've had all kinds of things happen, and I can't even. It would take me forever to go on and tell you how people ended up costing me money left and right, down to the point to where I had to move in and had no choice but to live with relatives. It's scary to a degree, but it wasn't until 2007 that I actually started touching the remote viewing altogether. I started reading, and I started moving forward with it, and got real serious with it in probably late 2009, and just started going nuts with it. When I realized that, okay, all this stuff that's happening is happening, and remote viewing really does work, I kind of felt like I'm in a world of my own. Not only can I can't look at the world the same anymore, but now I understand that it would almost appear that there is one world that I live in and another world that regular people live in. And what I mean by that, of course, is I have people that are interested in me offing myself, and there's normal people out there that wouldn't want to see any of that happen. And
wait, who wants to see you? Who wants to see you off yourself?
This group of people would like to see that happen. I mean, every possible thing. I've been homeless. Every possible thing you can imagine has happened. I've been jumped. I've been beat. All kinds of things have happened. And the thing is all of this stuff happens, and I don't have any witnesses to witness any of this. None. So when I describe this stuff to people, they just think I'm crazy and whack. It's impossible. It's not happening. Sure, there was somebody where you went before you got there. Sure, that person actually started saying these things to you. Okay, all right, fine. Well, you don't need to believe it. But here's my thing. Before all of this happened, before I ran into remote viewing, I was a very closed-minded individual. Completely. Now, I believe absolutely anything is possible. They use this skill. Keep in mind that they use this skill to go after the enemy. So you ask, is this something that could be used against a person? Absolutely. Is it going to be like in my situation? I don't think so. No way. No way. Absolutely not. Not to the same degree. I don't.
So what has
believe
remote
that for a
viewing
minute.
been for you?
What is it?
What have you?
Well, I'll tell you. I spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time at home. And I do spend a lot of time alone. So, with the exception of my aunt and uncle who I live with. So what it's done for me is it's given me a little bit more sanity. Paul mentioned something about people that come in and start doing the skill and lose it, and there's stories about that. That's not, this skill, it can bring in nutcases and it can bring in very stable people. And I don't believe for a minute that this skill would be something that would harm you to the point to where you become unstable. As a matter of fact, it's helped me, it's enhanced my life, it's made me more comfortable. It can be a very therapeutic thing to do. I would say the only downside for me is that after long sessions, I'm very, very tired, and I need to sleep. I take a ton of vitamin B because it can be mentally draining. When I view a very pleasant target, after I'm done, before I look at the feedback, I feel very peaceful. And when I view something that's maybe like a war target where people are fighting or anything like that, before I view the feedback, I might feel a little uncomfortable. So there can be certain feelings and changes within you from what's called bilocation, because you have to remember that when you're remote viewing, part of your unconscious is actually at the site. So it's actually present at the site that you're getting perceptions from. If it's real hot there, your body temperature could go up. Those things can happen. They do happen for me. So it has, but it hasn't had a negative effect. If anything, I do have a more positive mindset, regardless of my circumstances, regardless of things that happened. You know, having lost my mother, I was just floored for years, and you know, my mindset is changing. You don't look at things the same anymore. You just don't. And I will say this for anybody, because when I got started, it was a little bit frustrating for me. And people that are very, very intuitive, it may be that way at first. Some people this comes real, real fast for, and others it doesn't. But it's worth it to stick it out, and it's worth it to stick with it. I mean, it can definitely do good things for your life.
Have you tried to take this professional as far as doing it as employment? Have you gotten paid to remote view for other people?
No, not yet. That's the direction I'm wanting to head. Actually, I'm going to go through Paul's CRV course. So I'll be actually starting his course in, I believe, February. If he told me he's looking at the end of February, hopefully, to have a class, and so I want to go through his class. But my overall goal, it was to take revenge, but it's not that anymore. My overall goal is I want to locate missing children.
Really?
So,
that's noble.
Yeah. It's I want to help find missing and abducted children, and it's funny because you start doing this skill, and it gives you all kinds of ideas. Well, I want to play the stock market and make money, which you can do. Paul didn't talk about it much, but with associative remote viewing, you can use it to play the stock market. You can make some money. But the thing is that once you start getting into it, your decisions for what you want start to change as well. So
it sounds like you found a lot of. You sound like you found peace with doing this. That it's actually almost become a meditative state for you, almost easing.
Well, yeah. You know what? I tend to think so. I mean, I don't meditate at all, but this has definitely given me some peace. I think if I hadn't gotten into the circumstances that I had gotten in, to tell you the truth, I don't even think I'd be doing this.
Let me ask you a question. You're not paying attention to the SHTF411.com mini chat, are you?
No, actually, no, because I'm outside. Okay. Why? Did somebody ask you a question, or?
Well, we have a question, and you said you can't front, or can you front load, or we have a question about if you would want to try doing a reading or a remote viewing, and I want to see if I can pose that question to you in a way that'll allow it to work.
Okay.
So what would I do to and how long would it take? How long does an average remote viewing take you?
About 45 minutes.
45
and
minutes.
it would be it would be on paper. It would be on paper with a pen. So would, you know,
are you RV Brett? Did you sign up as RV Brett?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So if there is a question, we've got a question right now, and I'm going to actually erase the post in our chat, so you have no idea what it is. How would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to take a shot at a remote viewing question or topic?
As an actual session, I mean, I would have to do the session on paper. I mean, I wouldn't just trust. And that means I'd pretty much have to hang up the phone, take the time, and do the session. Is it somebody that has written a queue that just wants to give me numbers, have me do the session? Is that kind of
what can I tell? I mean, in other words, you don't have to get off the phone right now. You join the forum, and you can post actually in that same thread at any time, whether tonight or tomorrow. And
okay,
what would you need to write down to start the remote viewing on that?
Okay, it's for a particular session without front loading it.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I can give you the information to front load it, but it would be up to you.
I'd rather not front load it. I'd prefer not to front load it, but I could, depending on what it is, I could give you I could kind of give you a quick education on queuing. And I could tell you kind of how to write a queue. For instance, if it was my death, which I was actually tasked with by somebody, and I actually remote viewed my own death. I didn't know exactly what it was until much later. But it would just be like my name / death. If it was somebody's optimum life path or health, it would be like their name / optimum / health, or
so Can I? I'm gonna do this. Apparently, one of our forum members says I can do it. It's a missing person. What else would I have to give you beside that? Just missing person?
All right. Well, if it is a missing person, you would have to do the name of the missing person and / first of all, we want to verify that particular person is alive. So we'd want to do their name / present time, and then we'd want to do, once we verify whether that person is dead or alive, we'd want to do their name / present location. I will tell you, with a missing person, this is definitely something that can take more time. It can turn into, what turns into 45 minutes can turn into a 6-month project. However, having said that, the first thing to do is to find out whether that person is alive yet. So what you could do is take a 3x5 card, write down the numbers. Write down the numbers on the card. Just make up a set of 8 numbers, like 5247 / 1256, and then write the person's name / present time, and then give me the numbers, and I can run the session.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave that information. It was with one of our forum members, and I believe they heard that. So actually, I'm reading it right now. We've got a private messaging system that they're going to go ahead. You should see it the next time you refresh, let's say in 20 minutes when you refresh the forum page. You'll have it's kind of like a pop-up, but it'll be a private message. And if you just click on that, I guess the information
okay,
just
I'm also willing to give out my email address, which I'm planning on getting a website up much later, not now, but I do have an active email address, which is info@rveducators.com.
Can you give that one more time?
Yes, info, I-N-F-O, @rveducators.com. I would be more than happy to take the email. If somebody is wanting to do a missing persons type of deal, I would prefer that person, if they heard what I said, to go ahead and build the 3x5 card, write the TRNs, and write the person's name / present time, and just send the TRNs to me.
Okay, I think they all, let's see.
And I will see what I will see what I get. I can actually do the session in the morning, and I can send the results back. I can send the results back of what I get.
Okay, well, I think we definitely have some forum members that will want to check that out. What is, I was, when in talking to Paul, he said his accuracy rate, he believed, was between 70 and 80%. Where
Correct.
have you said that you've done the blind, just pulling it out of a box. What do you think your accuracy rate is at?
I would say right now, blind, I would say that I'm right around 70 to 80% consistently. I have had a couple of sessions where I've hit 85%, but like what Paul was saying, it is true. You need experience. You need to do this for a while, and the more you do it, the more you work that muscle, that psi muscle in your head, the more the more accuracy you gain. So, but also, if you have a team of people, if you have a team of viewers, the accuracy rate goes a lot higher. And it is like Paul said, it's very hard to measure accuracy. It really is. Front loaded, I don't have a lot of faith in front loading.
Have you ever looked into the Kennedy assassination?
I have not, no.
Okay, now I've got another question. Regarding the missing person, would you be willing to have the results, what you come out with, posted in that thread?
I don't see why not.
Okay.
I don't see why not. Keep in mind, though, I'm not a 7-year veteran like Paul Smith, and I don't have years and years of experience. I'm still a baby, so.
Well, that's true, but at the same time, it's a skill that everyone has, so it would be very interesting to see how close you come.
Yes. I have no problem doing that.
Do you do lottery
numbers?
Fine.
Lottery numbers? Okay, so everybody understands this. Numbers in remote viewing, it is very, very difficult to pull that off. Nobody's won the 6-number lotto. Nobody's done it with remote viewing. There have been a few people that have done the 3-number lotto. There is a way to do it, but I don't find it to be 100%.
I asked someone else actually asked that, but it does strike a chord with me because I played one of the state lotteries, and I hit all 6 numbers. I didn't live in that state, and I had no prior information from the state or anything. I hit all 6 numbers from the prior month. That was like a $50 million jackpot, but I hit it a month later, so obviously I didn't win anything. It was that was, I was curious about the lottery thing, because I still don't know why I hit all 6 numbers a month later, and there was no way I could have seen the numbers anywhere. I didn't live in the state. I was just passing through, and so yeah.
Time is a time numbers and time. That's a really, really sensitive subject, because time, technically, mind is outside of time. So where you know, I believe that there are people that are mentalists that can actually know those types of things, but it doesn't have anything to do with remote viewing. I mean, it does have something to do with intuition, but it doesn't have anything to do with remote viewing. So I would say, you know, where you could do, where you could look at something in TRV. I don't know about, I can't speak for CRV, but in TRV, you can do what's called an optimum trajectory and look at, for instance, that would be your life path over the next 30 days. And you would set the queue up as your name, optimum trajectory, and you would do next 30 days. Obviously, that's not going to give you a day-to-day breakdown, but it is going to give you a guideline to follow.
All right, I was just told that you've got a private message, or I believe it's actually an email waiting that does apparently have the information that you asked for. So,
okay.
And it was accompanied with a thank you. So just when you get around to it, we would love to look at what you come up with.
Okay, no, that's true. Go ahead.
We had one member, Nemesis 2012. We asked Paul, and I want to ask you, have you ever heard of the black hole, and have you encountered any psychic assassins or other more in-depth type psychic warriors?
Wow, you know, okay, and this is the guy that he is getting basically the information from Illuminati News.
Yeah.
Is okay. You know, I want to make a comment outside of remote viewing, because when I was a kid, my aunt had mentioned that there was a book published about the Illuminati, and then it was taken off the shelves, and the author went missing along with the book. I don't know how true the story was, but I would tend to believe that there's things that are, because the Illuminati is basically connected to the Freemasons, and it's basically like the quote secret society. There are things we just don't know that some people do know. I would wonder how, first of all, you would actually remote view that, because the black hole sounds to me like that's almost more of a code name. So it's like trying to remote view Area 51. Area 51 is not really called Area 51. I don't know what it's called. But I know it's not really called Area 51. And in order to actually remote view Area 51, you would have to know what it's really called. So to really find out anything, I have never heard of that. I know that there are remote viewers that go up against each other, viewer to viewer. As far as psychic assassins, I'm not real familiar with that at all. But I know there are viewers that go up against each other, that view each other, and they go back and forth to play games. I mean, that's not for me. I'm not with that. So I hope that answers the question.
You said you couldn't turn this off. Now, when I asked Paul that question, he said you can turn it off, but it gets harder. Now, my question for you is, have you experienced more in-depth dreams? When you enter the dream state, the REM sleep stage, do you experience remote viewing and dreams? Or are you having lucid dreams?
Wow. I'm going to try and let me try and answer that question. Sometimes, yes, but one second here. I just have to check the battery here on my phone. Sometimes, yes, I do. Not a lot, but I do at times. And as far as you can't turn it off. This is not, when you start to exercise your intuition, the more you exercise it, the sharper it becomes, the more refined and more honed it becomes, and things will come in. Now, if you're a person that, can't deal with that, that may be a problem for you. But it wouldn't be remote viewing that would cause that problem. It would be you not being able to deal with your own intuition, which, we're all born with that aspect. We all have. It's just whether we tap into that, whether we tap into our intuition or not. I really didn't have a choice. It just was. It just boom there. So other people, hey, we're raised in a society where we're taught think, and I just, I don't like thinking. It drives me nuts.
Now, are you familiar with the Kundalini, and do you believe that remote viewing is it activating the pineal gland?
No. I'm not familiar with that. No, I wouldn't. I do not know. I wouldn't say. I couldn't say.
Are you familiar with the Kundalini or anything like that?
No, I'm not.
Basically, what it is there's a lot of talk that the pineal gland, which is somewhat in the base of your skull, is a third eye, and that's where a lot of these experiences come from. I guess it'd be more of a visual experience, which is different than remote viewing in that it does include all five senses. Do you actually smell stuff at times?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Does remote viewing involve? Well, the third eye is. That is considered intuition. I guess I've never heard of it referred in the way that you just said it. But you are using all your senses. It's just a matter of waking those up. But you're perceiving them. So it's not like if you light a cinnamon candle and you smell that cinnamon real strong. It's almost as if you're so you might, while you're remote viewing and you come to smells, you come to the smells category, and you have to write down a few words describing smells. You might go, and intuitively something comes to you, and then you might get a smell. Yes, you could get it real light or strong. I tend to get things very, very light when it comes to smells and when it comes to tastes. I'm better with colors, I'm better with textures, and I'm better with dimensions, and also feelings. How does the sight feel? Is it peaceful? Do I feel tense? Do I feel angry? That's much stronger for me, like in those areas. But yeah, there are some remote viewers that actually get it real strong. It just depends. It really does. Each person is going to be different in that sense. So
for a person starting out and they've never done it before, what is your opinion as far as the best place to start this journey to becoming a remote viewer?
As far as training goes?
Mm-hmm.
As far as training? Okay. I have no problem saying that. I have had quite a few conversations with Paul.
Now, wait, let me back up here. Let me back up. Okay. Starting training as far as someone that doesn't have $1,000, someone that may have, at best, maybe $100. What do they do?
Okay. Well, the first thing I can tell everybody out there is that, first of all, let me tell you something. There are people in this industry that all they're out to do is take your money. So I would be real careful about if you're going to spend any type of money. And you see something out there for $150, $200, it's probably, you get what you pay for. It's like with anything else. I can honestly say that I would have trained with Paul first, but for somebody that is just starting out, that has limited money. Here's what I would say first. Go out and search for the CRV manual. Go to the IRVA, which is the International Remote Viewing Association website. There's tons of documents out there that you can read for free. There's a lot of free information on remote viewing, but get a hold of the CRV manual. And it's not very entertaining reading. But run through the manual and make sure this is something that's very, very interesting for you. I will say this, the manual is a reference manual, and it's not something that is necessarily used for training. It doesn't replace training. However, there's also a lot of people out on the Internet that have been trained, and they're charging a ton of money for remote viewing. Now I'm going to turn into the remote viewing advocate. Do not spend money with somebody that doesn't have excellent credentials and has a good quality program. That is all I can say. And I've been through Ed's course. I'm wrapping things up at SciTech. So if anybody really wants to know where to go, all I could say is I would have started with Paul.
By various people such as technical remote viewing, scientific remote viewing, those are all spin-offs of the main controlled remote viewing. And then there's others. I like to call them generic remote viewing. These are ones that people just kind of developed on their own and do it different ways. And anticipate probably the next question. The differences here are this. In controlled remote viewing, the viewer is sitting at a table or desk or whatever with a stack of paper and a pen. A reference number, we call them coordinates, is given to the viewer. The viewer puts that down, writes, and is in a relatively a normal state of consciousness, although a mild altered state just sort of get induced over time as you're working on the session. Extended remote viewing is a bit different. In extended remote viewing, the viewer is actually laying down in a quiet, dimly lit room and attempts to get to the point right between being awake and asleep. We call it a hypnagogic state. The viewer tries to establish that with the idea that then the data can come in more easily when the brain is less active, at least in terms of our analytical everyday kind of behavior. And so you can see those are kind of different modes or methods of doing remote viewing, but the goal is the same, to allow a human to perceive through non-sensory means. Even though it involves some kind of perceptual process, it does not involve the direct senses to perceive information or experience location outside of where they, in theory, ought to be able to do it according to standard physical science.
Is this a right brain, left brain scenario? You mentioned having to get in a quasi, almost, I want to say, trance state. Is it a right brain issue? I've heard a lot of talk about.
In ERV, you are kind of in, I guess you might say, a trance state, although maybe just more relaxed state with your mind-awake body asleep, kind of a condition. Obviously anything we do involves left brain, right brain. Our brains, unless you've had your corpus callosum severed, both hemispheres are going to be working together or at odds, as the case may be. It appears that it is the right brain that actually receives the input. and processes the input in that sense. And of course, the left brain gets involved in when you're attempting to describe what you're seeing, verbalize, write down. But, of course, the left brain also causes trouble because that seems to be the source of most of the mental noise, because it's the left brain's job to interpret any information that comes in through the system, through the nervous system. And when this information, the ESP information, if you will, the information you get through a remote viewing process, when it starts to come in, the left brain feels like it needs to explain what it is, give an interpretation of it.
Tonight we'll be joined by Mr. Paul Smith, a retired U.S. Army major. He served 7 years in the government's remote viewing psychic espionage program at Fort Meade, Maryland. He is one of only a handful of government personnel to be personally trained in coordinate remote viewing, CRV for short, by Ingo Swann. He was the primary author of the government's remote viewing program, CRV Training Manual, and served as theory instructor for new CRV trainee personnel. Mr. Smith is also the author of the book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, Inside Stargate, America's Psychic Espionage Program. You can learn more about Mr. Paul Smith and purchase his book at his website, rviewer.com. That is rviewer.com, rviewer.com. Tonight's show will be broken down into 2 segments. The first segment will be an hour interview with Paul Smith, followed by up to a second full hour of open lines. The call-in number to tonight's show is 760-542-3929. Again, that's 760-542-3929. Good evening, Paul. You are on the air. Good evening.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. I'm glad you made it on short notice. It was short notice, and what an interesting topic. So I'm very appreciative, and so are our members at the forum who are tuning in right now and participating on our mini chat at shtf411.com. So I've heard you on Coast to Coast before. I've seen the show with you talking to Freeman Fly, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a brief overview of what remote viewing is?
Yes, remote viewing it's really a skill. It's something that can be taught and transferred, that capitalizes on the underlying, I guess you could say, intuitive or psychic capability that everybody just innately has by virtue of being human. It helps an individual sort of learn how to recognize, ultimately the training helps an individual learn to recognize between the mental noises going on in his or her mind at any given moment and the really subtle signal that's coming in through the intuitive sources or through ESP. I noticed someone in one of the chat comments said, well, it sounds like ESP to me, and it really is. Remote viewing is just a means of accessing the ESP capability that each of us has. And it allows the viewer, someone who applies remote viewing, we call a viewer. It allows the viewer to perceive a location, an event, a person that is distant from him or her, either like on the other side of the planet or inside a sealed room or maybe an image inside a sealed envelope, or even distant in time into the past, and with certain limitations. And those interpretations oftentimes are very wrong. They're completely mistaken. We call that analytical overlay, because the left brain is analyzing the information and trying to assign labels and names and such to it. And that's where a lot of the problem with being psychic comes from. If you don't understand that your left brain is going to be trying to get into the mix and do all this analyzing, you oftentimes will come out with completely wrong stuff. And then people make fun of you, saying, "Oh, you're not psychic; you're just making all that up, right?"
Now, I'm trying to understand this. In your mind, are there pictures that are coming through, or are you almost like, is it automatic writing, or I'm trying to envision the.
It sounds to me like what you need is to me to kind of describe what remote viewing is like, what the experience is like. That would probably answer that question best. And remote viewing is, first of all, the term remote viewing is really a kind of a misnomer. A researcher and psychic and artist and all kinds of things, a guy named Ingo Swann, kind of a man who wears many hats. He's the one that developed the remote viewing protocol originally, And he named it remote viewing because his experience was he got a lot of visuals, right? But remote viewing actually is more than just a visual experience. It involves all of the senses, the perceptual senses. So you can smell things that are target, you can taste them, you can touch them, you get the tactiles off of it, you get temperatures and all that kind of thing. You get all of that stuff comes in. Now, it just so happens that humans process the world largely visually, and so you do kind of focus on that, and so hence remote viewing sort of fits, but isn't quite accurate. I really wish that he had named it remote perception. That would be a much better term, and the folks at Princeton who are researching some of this ESP stuff for a long time at the Pear Lab, they did call it remote perception. So that's really a better term because it involves all aspects of perception. Okay, that's a side step there for a second. But what is it actually like to do remote viewing? And you can think of it this way: your mind is gaining information, and a lot of it is sensory oriented. Even though your senses aren't involved, you're still getting these smells and tastes and colors and shapes and all this kind of thing. So that's coming in. And your brain is slowly trying to put those together and give you a coherent picture of it. But what comes in is actually, you do ultimately kind of get images, but you have to be careful with the images because oftentimes those are left brain constructs. It'll take the information that's coming in, and then it will process it and say, well, what is this anyway? And then it'll offer you a solution that's maybe mistaken. So a good example might be, let's say the target is the Eiffel Tower. Okay, so now here's a piece of information you need to know to understand what I'm about to say. In remote viewing, the viewer should be blind to the target. What that means is the remote viewer should have no idea what the target is up front when they're doing a session. There are a number of reasons for this, which may be into the future.
Now, is it a honing of people say, oh, I've got a sixth sense and I felt it coming or I knew something was coming. Is it a honing of that ability or is it something different?
Well, it's an application of that ability, I guess would be the best to say, and there might be some honing that gets involved as well. Most people who pay any attention at all to their experiences probably have, at one time or another, had one of those sort of sixth sense sort of experiences. They've just known who's on the other end of the phone when a phone call comes in, or they've had some alert or some dream or something when someone that was close to them had a problem or was under stress or been injured, something like that. Or who knows, any myriad of other kinds of things. Even sort of deja vu effects. Sometimes people will realize that they have had that experience before. They really haven't had an experience they encounter, but it all falls into place and they say, oh man, I had that. It was a dream or something. I know that has happened to me before. That maybe I had some kind of precognitive awareness of it. Now, some straight deja vu effects just are deja vu, but some of them actually are awareness of some future event that you will experience. And the irony is that people think of these as being some huge momentous event, but quite frequently have these little precursors of the future of relatively plain old mundane kind of things. That happens a lot to people.
Now, you mentioned you've been saying remote viewing is used for people. Can it be used for objects and inanimate?
Well, actually,
items?
objects and locations and events are the more frequent targets that are used, and people are too. But in the military, when we applied it in the military, we were actually more concerned with describing locations, objects, and events. So, for example, we might want to know what's inside a building in the Soviet Union that we can't get any other more conventional spy access to. Task the remote viewer to describe them inside the building, and then on those times when they were successful, a remote viewer would actually succeed in describing what was inside the building in terms of apparatus, activities, those kinds of things.
Now, is there a set ritual and possibly like maybe a remote viewing etiquette as far as preparation or the actual setting that it's being conducted in? Like, do you have a... Go ahead.
Yeah, there are actually a number of methods and approaches to remote viewing, and some of the listeners may have heard of these. The one that I teach and promote is called controlled remote viewing. There's another methodology called extended remote viewing. There are sort of derivatives of controlled remote viewing Tommy will go into later, but for now, remote view has to be blind to the target. So he or she has no idea that the target is the Eiffel Tower, no conscious idea that the target is the Eiffel Tower. And the viewer is given a tasking number, let's say 8675309, just for an example. Okay, so 8675309 means describe the Eiffel Tower to the person who wants the viewer to do this, but the viewer is only given the number 8675309, and then their subconscious has to go out and find out what that mission is, what the tasking is, which is describe the Eiffel Tower. So then the viewer's subconscious finds the Eiffel Tower and starts feeding that information in. But it comes in at first in bits and pieces. You only get little flashes of things, colors, maybe shapes, textures, and then you might get kind of relationships between shapes. So you might get this impression of crisscrossing steel beams of some kind. Okay, and that's your first real glimpse of what the Eiffel Tower might be in your head, but obviously that's only part of it. Well, what happens then is your left brain gets the idea there's crisscrossing steel beams, and the left brain says, oh, I know what that is. That's the bridge we crossed last summer when we were on vacation, okay, because there are similarities between a steel girder bridge and the Eiffel Tower, right? So the trick is to, of course, learn not to do that. But you can see what the actual truth content was. It was crisscrossing beams, black, cool, shiny, maybe wet if it's raining there, who knows, right, and things like that. And the left brain jumped on that and interpreted it in a certain way. But as you go through the session, and of course this assumes you know what you're doing, as you go through the session, the information gets more robust. You start getting more details, and you reach a point where you can actually sketch the shape of whatever the target is or important shapes there. You start getting more information like maybe tourism, maybe foreign. You might even get the idea it's in France. Those kind of things start coming in, and you start to build a better picture. And when I say picture, I'm speaking figuratively here. You start to build a better, construct a better idea, if you will, of what the target is. Now, you may never actually get to the point where you're able to say for sure that this is the Eiffel Tower. What you might be able to say instead is something like this. It's a tall, metallic structure with crisscrossing, lattice-like construction. It's in a foreign country. People come to visit and take pictures. It's monumental in size, very impressive, and I really like it. Okay. Now, notice you never once said it's the Eiffel Tower, but the description is absolutely correct. So
wow.
That's sort of how it develops in general. Ultimately, you do get to the point where in some settings and some sessions when you're really on, you actually do get really kind of full-blown images of the target because by then you have so much information that you're able to have those, right? And well, I could tell you a bunch of stories about those kind of things. But